In this video, we are going to derive the quadratic formula by completing the square. We're going to start off with the standard form of a quadratic set equal to 0. So we have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a, b, and c are real numbers. When we are using the quadratic formula or solving a quadratic, we are trying to find what x is when y is 0, or in other words, we are trying to find any x-intercepts for a given quadratic. So we're going to take this equation and complete the square to solve for x, and we'll end up with the quadratic formula when we do that. The first step in completing the square is to separate these first two terms into their own group and divide out the leading coefficient. So we're going to divide out a from ax squared, and because bx is also in that group, we need to divide bx by a as well. When we do that, we're going to have a times x squared plus b over a x plus c equals 0. Where b over a, because b and a are just real numbers, b over a is just a fraction. Looks a little weird, but we keep it out in front because it's now the new coefficient that goes with that x. The next thing that we're going to do is subtract c from both sides. Some people, when they complete the square, do this step at the very end. I like to do it right here. So when we do that, we're going to have a times x squared plus b over a x, and I'm going to leave some space for what's coming next, equals, and then on the right side I have 0 minus c, so I'm just going to put negative c. Now this is the big completing the square step, and if you haven't completed the square before, I might lose you, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to make this factor right here into something squared. If we were to factor this, it would be the same thing twice multiplied together. And so there is a little trick or an easy way to remember that might not be intuitive if you haven't completed the square a lot. But on this next line, we're going to rewrite a, and instead of this big parentheses, we're going to break this down into something squared. So this is the actual complete the square step. When we do this, because we have an x squared, we know we're going to have an x here because x times x will give us that x squared. And then the trick comes in because to get what's missing, we're going to take b over a and divide it by 2. When we divide a fraction by 2, we're just multiplying the denominator by 2. So b over a divided by 2 is b over 2a. And to get back up to this blank that we've left, we're going to square b over 2a. When we square a fraction, we square the top and get b squared, and the bottom and get 4a squared. So again, that's the completing the square step. If you got lost on that, that is something you just kind of have to memorize when completing the square, and probably need to go back and review some videos on that. So now we can't just randomly add something to an equation or else it doesn't stay balanced. So by adding b squared over 4a squared to the left side, I need to also add that to the right side. But if you notice here, I didn't just add b squared over 4a squared. I added that times this a that we had factored out a few steps ago. So when I add b squared over 4a squared, I need to multiply that by a. All right, I'm going to simplify that right side. And when I do that, one of these a's cancels out. And then I'm also going to take this term and put it in front of that minus c to make my life easier down the road. So this would be b squared over 4a minus c. And again, our goal is to solve for x, so I'm going to divide by a as my next step to doing that. So this would be x plus b over 2a squared is equal to b squared over 4a squared minus c over a. Again, trying to get x by itself, the next thing I would do would be to square root both sides. When I do that, I'll have x plus b over 2a. When you square root something, when you're solving, we're going to consider both the positive and negative solution. So this would be plus or minus the square root of b squared over 4a squared minus c over a. Trying to get x by itself, I'm going to subtract b over 2a from both sides. And I'm left with x is equal to negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared over 4a squared minus c over a. And our goal was to solve for x, and you can see here we've done that, but this isn't typically what you see as the quadratic formula because that's not super easy to memorize. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean it up with some algebra so that we'll end up with something that is the quadratic formula, which is a lot easier to memorize than this right here. But this would still give you the answer, just a little bit messy. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get a common denominator inside the square root so I can combine them. So I need those two to both be 4a squared. So I'm going to multiply c over a by 4a over 4a. And we have to do the same in the numerator and denominator to keep that equal to 1. So we're not messing up the balance of the equation here. So we have x is equal to negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 4a squared. I went ahead and combined those because they both have 4a squared in the denominator. And then from here, I have negative b over 2a plus or minus. I can take the square root of 4a squared, and when I do that, I'm going to leave b squared minus 4ac on top with the square root, but then underneath that, I just get 2a. And luckily here the denominators already match, so we have 2a on both of these. So I end up with x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And notice here this is a quadratic formula that we see and typically memorize. It is equal to this one here once we got x all the way by itself, but this first one that we ended up getting is not easy to memorize, whereas if you do some algebra, you end up with the quadratic formula that we memorized today because this one's not too bad.